Solution Series program titled What's Next for Retail? Summer 2011 Retailer Real Estate Demand Outlook. My name is Sandy Hudson, and I will be your host. The Solution Series programs are available at no cost to NAIOP members. These mini webinars run less than 30 minutes, and our goal is to provide you with some quick tips and insights, all types of positive strategies and tactics to help you succeed in today's business environment. We encourage you to drive the content. Please send us an email to solutions@naiop.org to let us know what topics and presenters you would like to hear from in future programs. Please advance to the next slide. NAIOP has produced the popular Solution Series programs for 2 years. Did you miss one of our informative topics? The archives of these programs are available to NAIOP members at no cost through the on-demand bookstore. Examples of past programs are listed on the current slide. Our topics cover finance, niche development, logistics, and more. Visit the NAIOP website at www.naiop.org/Solution Series for links to the archives. Next slide, please. And now let's get on with our program. With us today is Garrick Brown, National Director of Retail Research for the Chainlinks Retail Services Group, as well as the Director of Research for Chainlinks' Northern California affiliate company, Terranomics. Prior to Chainlinks Terranomics, Garrick served as the Vice President of Research for Colliers International in Sacramento for 8 years. While with Colliers, he also acted as the Director of National Retail Research. Garrick is also the founder and creator of the Bay Area Comp Network and Central Valley Comp Network. These groups work closely with the Northern California commercial appraisal community and facilitate the exchange of commercial real estate data among their members. Welcome, Garrick. Thanks for being with us today.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm here today to speak about what we see for the rest of the year for retailer demand for commercial real estate. And I actually have some good news, even though anyone who's been following news in the recent weeks has probably noticed that we've had a spate of bad economic news really since the last days of May. If you look at the economy, the U.S. economy had been really on a upswing going back to about November of last year. For retailers, that actually goes back to September and before, where we've been seeing same-store sales on the increase. From about September onward, we've seen luxury retailers back in the game. A lot of players that throughout the heart of the recession were seeing double-digit same-store sale decreases. Suddenly we're back into double-digit increases. Nordstrom, Abercrombie & Fitch, Neiman Marcus, all these guys had a nice bounce back that showed us that luxury consumers were back. And we've had a nice stretch. Christmas in 2010 blew away all expectations for analysts, set off a whole chain of events as far as increasing retailer demand, and everything seemed to be going great guns until this past week. And basically, what we saw was a slew of negative reports coming out. So I want to address those first before I get into the micro demand issues. But basically, this last couple of weeks, we got lousy housing data as far as the Case-Shiller indicating that we've got a double dip in home prices. We got a weak jobs report. Manufacturing output dropped. Consumer confidence dropped. Consumer spending was showing declines. All of this have kind of ignited some fears that there may be a double dip recession, things that we haven't heard people talking about since fall of last year. And of course, the real culprits here, gas prices is the big one, and then certainly the impact of the Japanese earthquake and tsunami disaster. That's really wreaked some havoc on the manufacturing sector. The real problem, of course, is gas prices. Now, there's actually some good news here, and the fact of the matter is that over the last month, gas prices have dropped by about 20-25 cents. They're on the decline now. The USEIA, the Energy Information Association, basically is predicting that this pattern is going to hold through the end of the year, that we should get down to at least $3.54 a gallon by December. Yesterday there was an announcement by OPEC that they're going to raise production to try to keep a lid on prices. These are huge because if you look at the news lately, I think a lot of this comes back to the cumulative effect of gas pricing. Now certainly whether or not OPEC keeps their word and whether or not that keeps speculation from coming back into play is always a question. But the reality is over the last few months, gas prices have really been the problem. Now, I'm a firm believer that we're not going to see a double-dip recession. And basically, not that I need to explain away the bad news, but I am going to explain away the bad news. The fact of the matter is the housing data really shouldn't have come as much surprise to us. The increases we saw last year were all basically about the market being propped up from the tax incentives that were in place. The sad fact is that housing is the weakest part of our economy right now. It is going to be the last thing to recover, and we probably are looking at 2013, 2014 before we see any sort of normalcy there. This, of course, is going to continue to be a drag on employment because it's impacting our construction sector greatly. But the news isn't all completely horrible. One of the things where we are seeing a lot of movement is in the multifamily sector, and there we're seeing the stage being set for some really significant rental rate increases. The fact is no one's built housing, whether it's single family or multifamily, in any significant numbers for about the last 5 years. There's pretty much going to be a shortage of housing in the very near future, especially for multifamily. One of the problems that we've seen is that consumers are not going out, they're not purchasing homes, which obviously has led to the pricing collapse worsening. But it's also meant that there's more people in multifamily. Vacancy for multifamily is dropping. And rents are going to be increasing sharply in nearly every single market in the very near future. One other factor to keep an eye on is that in any typical year, the United States will see about 800,000 households being formed. Now, household formation is really a factor of a couple of things. Generally, it's kids growing up and moving out of the house, going out on their own. Now, throughout the recession, we saw those numbers drop off significantly. Certainly, everyone knows someone who's got a 20-something kid who's come back home after school and who's living in the basement, living in the extra bedroom. The job picture has been really rough. There have been a lot of folks that have doubled up, moved back in with roommates. Well, as employment slowly improves, there is a pent-up demand for households from these people that we were going to see going back out into the market. They're going to first be looking at apartments. Again, another factor is going to raise rents. Now, as rents rise, we will finally start to see consumers looking at buying homes again. Right now, there's kind of a consumer preference for rentals. There's a whole shell shock as to whether or not you want to get committed to a single-family dwelling. That's going to slowly go away. The economics of owning versus renting are going to come back into play within the next couple of years. But make no mistake about it, this is the weakest part of our economy. It's going to be a long time before this gets fixed. But there's a reason for this recent bad news. It really shouldn't come as much of a surprise. Now, the jobs report. This is where I think things really started. Only 54,000 new jobs were created in May, and half of those were by McDonald's. That's generally not a good thing that you want to hear, not exactly high-paying wages. But, you know, one of the things to keep positive about is this still was positive territory. We're coming off of a 3-month stretch where between February, March, and April of this year, we averaged 220,000 jobs per month. The last stretch we had of 3 months that was even close was 5 years ago, from February through April of 2006. So we actually have had a nice stretch of some job creation here. The fact of the matter is that we're finally seeing that slow down, and again, I believe that's the cumulative impact of the rising fuel costs, and manufacturing has slowed because orders have slowed due to the Japanese disaster. Now, if you look at our trend here for employment, you know, we've seen positive growth since October 2010. The numbers have stayed on the positive side of the ledger. I believe that they're going to stay on that positive side of the ledger going forward. Now, there's a number of economists out there that had revised their numbers upward earlier in the year. We've kind of stuck with the idea that the market's got a lot of headwinds facing it, and from January onward, we've been saying that between 1.4 and 1.6 million jobs would be created this year. We actually still think that's a very realistic forecast, and that if you look at current levels, you know, it's definitely something that's sustainable. Now, we do think the big surge in job creation is going to be next year, 2.2 to 2.4 million jobs, and that's where I think we'll start to see some real quickening to the recovery. It's just been painfully slow so far. And lastly, we get to consumer confidence. You know, this is something that has caused a lot of concern because obviously there's the relationship between spending and consumer confidence. It isn't a direct relationship. Certainly if you look at where consumer confidence has been throughout the recession versus consumer spending, there's been a number of months where they've actually been quite divergent, where spending has gone up while confidence went down, and vice versa. But in the big scheme, they are definitely related. And seeing it drop six whole points in 1 month is a bit disturbing. But something to keep in mind, the Conference Board, who puts together the Consumer Confidence Index, basically closes their surveys out by about the middle of the month. And this past month, for May numbers, they closed out May 18th. We didn't really start to see the gas prices decline till just about the 10th, 11th of May, and it really didn't pick up traction until later in the month. So I happen to believe that the consumer confidence taking a hit this month really was more a reflection of gas prices finally getting to the consumer. It actually had gone up in April, and this is despite the fact that gas prices had been going up consistently since October. So keep that in mind. Now, do I believe that once the gas prices, the impact of their going down start to trickle through the consumers, that consumer confidence is going to immediately go up? Well, not necessarily. There's certainly the idea that this negative media cycle can influence consumers. You know, the fact is, if you get enough bad news, there's a self-fulfilling prophecy kind of effect that happens, and people do start retracting on their spending if there's too much bad news, and then essentially the economy goes further south. That's a real concern. It's something that you can't ignore. But the reality is that this latest spate of bad news really comes from two factors that are going to be lessening in their impact going forward. So hopefully that's going to hold up going forward in the coming months. What I suspect is consumer confidence may actually drop further for its June reading. But that by July, we hopefully should be picking back up again. So the good news as far as consumer spending is that as much as it finally has started to have shown impacts of the gas prices, the fact of the matter is that we've been on a 11-month stretch of increases, and that hasn't gone away. April retail sales were up. April same-store sales were up, and May same-store sales are just coming in now. They're a bit of a mixed bag, but what we're seeing is that discounters are doing okay and luxury retailers are doing okay. That shouldn't come as a surprise because it's those retailers in the middle that are getting pinched, just like it's the consumers in the middle that are getting pinched. And those consumers in the middle, basically, when they're pinched, they migrate to discounters. But luxury shopping's back. So no surprise that same-store sales, for example, for Nordstrom were, I believe, 7% up for May, which was quite a bit more than analysts expected. I believe they expected about 5%. So now May total retail sales from the Census Bureau haven't been released yet, but I expect them to remain in positive territory, although I think you will see, again, a big chunk of that being gobbled up by gas. So going forward, from the macro view, are there threats ahead? Yes. If gas prices go back on the upswing, we've got problems. And certainly the idea that we could have a negative media cycle influencing consumers and souring sentiment further, that could certainly happen. I think that will hopefully dissipate as we'll hopefully get some solid good news on the economic front as the gas prices decline. And then one of the things that continues to be an issue, and this is more on the employment front and for business decision makers, and that's the sense of a lack of governmental policy clarity. And that's something we hear repeatedly from decision makers who are in a position to boost their payrolls but continue to hold off as long as they can simply because the concept that they're not quite sure where things are going with taxes, et cetera. Policy clarity is something that we desperately need, and unfortunately I'm not sure that we're going to get much of that considering we're already getting into election talk 17 months, a full 17 months before we actually have an election. So that could remain a problem going forward. So let's get to the micro view for retail, what's going on. Let's take a look at shopping centers first. And the fact of the matter is that if you look at national shopping center vacancy, we essentially have been flat in the first quarter of this year. No change on the macro view in terms of vacancy, 10.8%. That's still a pretty elevated rate. The latest numbers from CoStar Group when it comes to asking rents indicate a very slight decline. Now, these numbers are kind of interesting because what they do is they take into account everything from unanchored strip centers. You know, it could be your little 10,000 square foot, 4-tenant building just down on the corner, all the way up to regional malls. You know, with Macy's, Sears, Kohl's, you know, full service anchors, million square foot and plus. So the asking rents, of course, throughout that spectrum can go from very low to very high. These numbers are best used as just a general benchmark because they don't really speak to specific centers or, say, urban retail. But on the whole, rents decline slightly. Now, if you break things out by market, we kind of see a few trends that are going in place, which is that for the most part, regardless of what part of the country you're looking at, whether it's the West Coast, the Mid-Atlantic, the Southeast, generally what we're seeing is that for the most part, shopping center vacancy and local employment levels seem to be in tune. That the areas with the lowest levels of unemployment also have the lowest levels of vacancy. There's a few places that don't quite stick out that way. For example, the Dallas-Fort Worth market, a lot of that's because the Texas economy held up so well comparatively throughout the recession that developers kept building there. And meanwhile, just about everywhere else in the United States, development has virtually disappeared. In fact, the first quarter of this year, we saw the lowest levels of development ever recorded. We're talking about nationwide a total of about 259 shopping centers being built. And when I say shopping centers, again, that's the whole spectrum going down to the 12, 15,000 square foot strip centers. That's a number that typically, in any typical normal non-recessionary year, would be 5 to 6 times that. So, but again, looking across the spectrum of the different markets, elevated vacancy pretty much across the board is still the name of the game. Numbers have come down a bit from last year, but the fact of the matter is there's still some challenges out there. Now, one thing we are seeing is that in this recovery, although it looks like the numbers are fairly flat, if you dig beneath them at the local level, this has not necessarily been the case. But I'm going to get into that in just a second. In terms of what is holding up strongest and where the best performances have been, certainly across the board it's been urban retail. We've seen that whether we're talking about Midtown Manhattan, Chicago State Street, downtown San Francisco. The fact of the matter is that rents dropped precipitously across the board for all retail product, and it spurred this renewed interest in getting into urban centers from retailers, and that includes big box retailers who've been making a lot of moves. Target, for example, is now coming out with urban Target design. They've signed deals recently in Seattle, downtown San Francisco, downtown LA. They're going into State Street on Chicago. They're looking into New York. Walmart's on the move, Washington, D.C., New York, Chicago, all have multiple stores in the works, some large, some small. Next up would be regional malls, which have had a nice little comeback. Just a couple of years ago, people were talking about the death of the mall and everything was going to be about lifestyle centers. Well, we built too many lifestyle centers before we hit the recession, and suddenly lifestyle centers are a bit out of favor in comparison to regional malls. Those that have a strong entertainment and dining component to them are doing exceptionally well. So they've had a nice little recovery. And following that would be neighborhood community centers, and these are your shopping centers that are anchored by grocery stores or drug stores. They've come back a bit. Certainly the strongest locations in most metros, they've come back quite well. big box space has seen a rejuvenation. If we're talking about junior box space, which would be in that 20 to 40,000 square foot range. Now these would be the types of buildings that we saw Circuit City and Linens and Things vacate when they went through their bankruptcies. The good news is there's been a slew of new retailers looking to backfill those buildings in those sizes if it's in top locations. And we'd estimate that by the end of this year, about 2/3 of that space vacated by Linens and Things in Circuit City is going to be backfilled. H.H. Gregg, east of the Mississippi, electronics chain out of Indianapolis, has just been on a tear and expanding, and former Circuit Cities are serving them well. We also have seen a number of organic grocery chains that are on the prowl. They like this format. Certainly, we've also seen number of users like Bed Bath & Beyond and typical 20 to 40,000 square foot users that are back in the market finally, and they're looking for this type of space. Ultimately, if you look at the market, even though it seems flat right now, we really hit bottom about a year ago. We're in the middle of this uneven recovery, but one thing that these numbers don't tell you, and I'm hearing this from every market, including the most challenged markets. And by that, again, generally the most challenged we're talking about where unemployment's the highest. So in terms of major markets, right now, Las Vegas, Sacramento, Riverside, San Bernardino, these are all markets where we still have 12% plus unemployment. But even in those markets, what we would deem Class A properties are actually thriving. And there's a weird dynamic going on here. It's not hard to understand, though, and that's that with a diminished pool of retailers that were looking for space, those who are looking for space are looking essentially to the top-notch quality, the top quality shopping centers first, those Class A centers. And because rents have declined across the board, they're finding deals there that they're inking deals, they're signing leases, and that's where they're looking first. Now, when you start looking out to the other markets that perhaps aren't so challenged, now we're seeing that deal volume is spilling over to the secondary locations, the Class B locations. And of course, that leaves us with Class C. And even in our strongest U.S. markets, Washington, D.C., Baltimore, San Francisco, San Diego, San Jose, Philadelphia, New York, even in those markets, Class C properties are still struggling. So Class A properties are not sure what they are. They would be your top intersections, relatively new centers or well-kept centers, strong tenant mixes, strong anchor tenants, and that's where we're actually seeing rental rate growth. And again, even in the weakest markets, for example, I'm hearing that from Las Vegas, which a lot of the concerns for people in Las Vegas was it was just complete disaster that all their major employment industries were just getting hit. Well, Class A centers are still doing well there. Class B properties, here's where we're seeing those markets that are doing well, are seeing their Class B properties thriving. And certainly I'm going to go over a list of the top performing markets here in a bit, but anything in our top 10, definitely you're seeing rental rate growth. And even some of the markets that are fairly in the middle, for example, Orlando, which has a bit of a high unemployment rate, but the vacancy is not too horrible, and there's a lot of retailer demand out there. We're seeing some rental rate growth in places like that. Now, in weaker markets, Class B properties are still facing some challenges, and they're still seeing flat rents to even some declines in the weakest markets. And then once again, Class C, this is your aging shopping centers. These are your unanchored strip centers, which frankly were built way out of control during the last upswing in the market. These are the centers where we're going to see more rental rate decreases, and they're what's really hampering the national averages that I showed you earlier. But where we would demand, well, here's the good news. We talked just briefly before about we had the strongest holiday shopping season since 2006. Basically consumers came through in a big way. They doubled what expectations were. Prior to Christmas, we track retailer demand and who's out there looking. And Prior to Christmas, we had already seen retailers coming back into the market. 2010 was just about discounters. By the end of the year, we started seeing other retailers gearing up for 2011, 2012, and retailer demand had up 30%. That would be as of December. By the time the Christmas numbers were in January, that was up to 40%. Publicly traded retailers suddenly were revising all of their growth estimates. They're under a lot of pressure from Wall Street to grow, so those numbers went through the roof. And those numbers are going to hold despite the recent economic hiccups. Just got back from ICSC's, the International Council of Shopping Centers Recon show in Las Vegas in May. And it's a very interesting show in that we have 30,000 participants there. And you know, I've had some retail brokers tell me that their estimate is that 1 in 5 to 1 in 6 of their deals that they do actually get inked at this show. It's a place where you can go and you can put your finger on the pulse of where the entire industry is going for the next 6 months to a year. Attendance was up 20%. Deals were getting done. Most of the brokers I've spoken to have told me that the amount of deals that they were inking at this event up 20 to 25 or 30% over last year. This was basically a huge success, probably the strongest deal year that we've had there in the last 4 years. Going forward, we're seeing almost all of the retailers upping their growth plans for next year. So we're not just seeing discounters either. We're seeing people from all ranges of the spectrum getting back into the market. So going forward, we're going to see retail demand further creeping up, more retailers that are on the prowl for space. Certainly the places that are most attractive to them are going to be markets with low unemployment, but we're also seeing a rebound for some of the coastal markets. For example, the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, Los Angeles, San Diego all have fairly high rates of unemployment. LA is about 10, San Francisco about 10%, San Diego about 9%. Yet there's a sense there that these markets are going to recover and that the rental rate decreases that came in when we all took a hit during the recession, that those are going to be short-lived. So there's a sense of urgency among retailers to get deals now. We're also seeing that in some eastern seaboard markets, but you know, for example, Boston's got a relatively low unemployment rate, so that's driving demand on its own. Washington D.C. is basically in the 5 or 6% range, and Washington D.C. has just been off the hook all the way up to Baltimore, down to suburban Virginia. The entire mid-Atlantic area is huge in retailer demand right now. Now, one of the things that we do through the Chainlinks network is we're in about 60 different markets, and we put a survey out each month to our brokers to rate where they see demand in their markets at the time. I'm not going to get into the specifics of this because we're limited on time, but this presentation is going to be available through the NAIOP website, so you can go through at your leisure. But essentially, we've seen across most markets, these numbers creep up significantly from where they stood last year and the year before. And we expect that our next survey that will be coming out in a couple of months, that they're actually going to probably continue to creep up. In terms of the strongest markets that we see out there, our power ranking has put basically Washington, D.C. at the top. That's because they have low vacancy there and a huge amount of retailer demand. Washington already is seeing strong rental rate increases for landlords, followed by San Francisco, where again, going into this had low vacancy. There is strong demand out there. Same thing for New York City. Going through our entire list, basically the two factors that have landed most of these cities on the list is either low unemployment or that there's this sense of urgency with retailers to get deals while rents are still a bit down from their peaks. But in all of these markets, we're seeing rental rate increases returning and rental rate growth finally coming back. Now, this is being driven, of course, because the field of retailers expanding has immensely grown. I'm not going to get into all of the details of these lists here that I put, but again, this is something you can look at your leisure. But we're just seeing a huge amount of growth. Certainly 7-Eleven looking to do 350 stores, you know, in the next few months. Bed Bath & Beyond, 60 stores. Casey's General Store, convenience store concept, wants to do 90 stores. Costco, they want to do about 20 stores over the next 15 months, you know, each at about 125,000 square feet. Dick's Sporting Goods wants to go on a rampage. They want to do 450 stores over the next 5 years. Fresh and Easy is back into growth mode. They've just recently opened all of their Northern California and Nevada stores, and we hear that they're going to the Midwest next. H.H. Gregg, 65 stores possibly in the next year. Again, these are all 40,000 square foot stores. Joseph A. Banks, 175 stores next 5 years. The list just goes on and on. You know, Pep Boys, 55 units. In fact, all the automotive guys continue to do well. They're all in expansion mode. Sports Authority, sporting goods stores are in expansion mode again. We didn't see a lot of that during the recession. TJ Maxx, of course, just like Marshalls and Ross, all of the discount clothier guys, they've all been in expansion mode. One of the interesting things that we've also seen is that department stores had shifted most of their growth plans to their off-price concepts throughout the recession. For example, Nordstrom, which had been doing anywhere from 2 to 4 full-service department stores a year, suddenly was doing just 1 or none, but had shifted to the Nordstrom Rack concept where they were starting to get up to pushing around 20 units a year. Well, with department stores back, you're going to start to see more interest in new department stores in the coming years. The real challenge is going to be finding space for it, finding construction. Now, as far as what's the weakest, you know, Class C properties, any type, unanchored strip retail, power centers remain hard hit, especially those that have mega boxes that are vacant, anything over 100,000 square feet. One of the things that we're seeing is that retailers are kind of downsizing their footprints. They're finding more ways to squeeze more retail sales out per square foot. This goes across the board, whether it's the idea that Walmart is looking at their new Walmart Express stores, where we're talking about 20,000 square foot grocery stores as opposed to 125,000 square foot superstores, although they're not completely ending that concept. They still are growing that, but they are shifting their growth. Or whether we're talking about places like Ruby Tuesdays, which was a 4,000 square foot casual dining concept that's now talking about looking into smaller concepts. Red Robin's doing the same. They're looking to get in on the burger wars, go from a 4,000 square foot, 5,000 square foot sit-down restaurant to maybe having some 2,000 square foot locations. So that's all going to have an impact on landlords. Going forward, we still got a lot of headwinds. Anyone who read the newspaper today, the retailers in the middle are getting pinched. Gap, for example, is going to close 200 stores. Those guys in the middle, until we start to see you know, the middle-class consumer feeling a little bit less pinched, are going to keep feeling it. The market's going to continue to favor discounters. It's going to continue to favor luxury shoppers or luxury retailers. But going forward, we're going to see a couple other trends pop up. One thing that's going to be interesting for investors is that because the conditions are actually slowly improving for retail, because vacancy will be creeping downward because of the slew of activity, and because there's more investors in the marketplace looking for properties, we're actually going to see more and more foreclosures taking place. This is going to be more of an impact of improving conditions and the fact that banks that have been in pretend and extend mode on properties that are essentially now in limbo, that they're going to make some moves. It'll be a negative sounding headline, but the fact of the matter is that they're going to finally be foreclosing on some properties because they're going to have places where they can place them and not take a complete bath on them, which is why they've been in limbo so far. One problem that we're going to see for the weakest properties, of course, is as these properties change hands and new ownership comes in with a clean slate, they will be lowering rents to attract tenants. So that could put some downward pressure on rents for, well, certainly in Class C properties, but possibly Class B and even some Class A properties in some areas. We also see a number of at-risk retailers that are still out there. Certainly, I've got a list here that we could go through, but these are all retailers right now with high debt-to-value ratios. In fact, Harry & David's already gone bankrupt, and so has Sbarro. The fact of the matter is that because they're on this list, it does not mean they're a lock for going bankrupt, but that any of the major bankruptcies that have happened in recent years, Blockbuster, Borders, you name it, pretty much they show up on this list first, which you can track the debt-to-value ratios, and there just gets a point where it's no longer a feasible concern. So these are all chains that have major issues that could be in trouble in the coming years. I'm going to make this real quick as far as looking forward. What's hot? Discounters, luxury retailers. It's not good to be in the middle right now. Casual dining continues to take pinches, feel the pinch. Fine dining is starting to come back. Certainly fast food and fast casual is ruling the roost. One thing to keep an eye on, as the economy either improves or worsens, and I happen to think it's going to improve, is really the performance of casual dining chains, people like Applebee's. They tend to be the canary in the coal mine. What are we going to see for the rest of the year? Well, certainly Walmart's a game changer with their new concept. We're talking about through the end of next year 300 to 400 stores possibly, and the Walmart Express format, which basically is going to be a 20 to 40,000 square foot small format grocery store, is going to be at the forefront of that. They've just opened their first prototypes in Arkansas, but they've been doing deals all over the United States, and we've been hearing anything from 12 units in Sacramento to as many as 20 in Detroit. They've locked brokers down on confidentiality agreements, so it's really hard to get accurate numbers. But just putting together the rumors that we've heard from different marketplaces, we could be looking at, like I said, as many as 400 units. The timeline is a little hazy, but end of next year possibly at the soonest. We can see all that coming to market. Now, this is going to put even greater pressure on grocery stores. Certainly Target, with its P-Fresh grocery concept, is already doing that as well. One of the problems that traditional grocery stores are dealing with is this influx of non-unionized players like Walmart and Target. Meanwhile, Walgreens, they hired away Fresh and Easy executive who'd always seen their launch in Southern California, and they've been building up their fresh food selections, and that's going to be rolling out to more stores in the coming year. Basically, what we could start seeing at Walgreens is pre-made food selections that would rival Fresh and Easy's. And we've heard that if that's successful, CVS might get into that game as well. So again, more people are looking for that the piece of the grocery pie. Problem is the grocery pie hasn't grown all that much. And the people who will be squeezed will be the unionized chains, who will have a lot of problems keeping up either with the pricing at Walmart or the costs of their own employees. So don't be surprised if you see some more consolidation in the grocery store industry, and the guys who are going to feel it the most will be the guys in the middle, the super values, the Del Hayes, the Safeways, the Vons, etc. They're going to have the toughest go of it, but those that can weather the storm mainly will do so by having superior site selection and really not getting away from their core values. Service, I wouldn't give up on service just yet if I were these players. Again, smaller footprints are going to be one of the trends for this year. One thing, unfortunately, we're going to continue to see really probably until housing improves, and that's that mom-and-pop retailers are just not going to be in the game. This all comes back to the fact that most of them start up with home equity loans, and until we see values stabilize, it's just eliminated that as a source of startup funding for most of these business. The good news is small business lending is on the upswing, but I still don't expect to see mom and pops in any big numbers back into the retail game before 2013. We're going to see more store within stores. Certainly JCPenney has had a great run by putting Sephora stores and Zara, Spanish fashion-forward retailer, into their stores, and we're going to see a lot more of that coming from different players in the year ahead. Co-branding kind of ties into that. For example, Darden's going to try out a Red Lobster Olive Garden co-brand. Not sure how that'll work, but the reality is you're going to see a lot more people kind of following that same model that Yum Brands did years back when they started putting together their Taco Bell and KFC concepts in A&W. Rite Aid and Super Value are getting together where they're trying branded locations that will put their chains together, and so far I've heard that those have been a success. Pop-ups are here to stay. You're going to see more of them, more pop-up restaurants actually popping up, which is going to be interesting. But temporary space for retail. Landlords have much less of a stigma against signing deals for temporary retailers, and a lot more retailers are demanding the right to try a pop-up to test locations. And certainly social media is going to play a greater role going forward. One of the things people need to keep an eye on, though, is what will be the long-term impact for retailers. Sites like Groupon are going to make things a lot more competitive for retailers in terms of pricing. So I'm not sure social media is going to turn out to be a great thing for the industry. The key is going to be mastering it early. Certainly for those retailers who look to renegotiate rents, that's been the name of the game the last 3 years. That window is closing. It's just simply not going to happen in most markets going forward as things strengthen. So going forward, you're going to see a lot more in the burger wars. You're going to see a lot more franchising growth from the sandwich guys. A lot of them have lowered their barrier to entry so that new chains can get, new franchisees can afford to get into the game. And we're seeing a lot more chains that were corporate-owned refranchising. Jamba Juice has been selling off corporate-owned stores. It's one of the ways that they weathered the recession. We continue to see that from other players like Applebee's and a mix of chains that are doing that. We're going to continue to see drugstores remaining solid, although Rite Aid continues to have debt issues. Your drugstore chains are really narrowed down to a three-horse race, Walgreens and CVS being the other players, and both of them are going to be adding between 200 and 300 new stores this year. Ethnic groceries will continue to be strong. Asian grocery concepts strong as well. And what we're also going to be seeing by the end of this year is that we'll finally start to see some retail development returning. Although most of it's going to be redevelopment or it's going to be urban infill. You're not going to see any suburban development until housing starts coming back, at least not any great numbers. And pretty much all of the stuff you're going to see happening will be with heavy pre-leasing commitments in place. So, but the outlook going forward is very strong for retailer demand. Certainly the overall economic picture remains a bit fragile, but if we can get past these hiccups of the last few weeks, I think that we're going to have a very strong end of the year for 2011, and that we're going to see some significant declines in vacancy in most markets. So I'll wrap that up with that, and I'm happy to answer any questions anyone might have. If you'd like to contact me, you can reach me at my email address, which is gbrown@terranomics.com. So thanks for having me.
Garrett, thanks for a great presentation and the update on the retail market. The NAIOP Solution Series is on hiatus for the summer. Our next program will take place on September 6th. Watch your email for NAIOP Source or corporate e-newsletter for the program link. Thank you for listening to our session, and goodbye for now.